helped me talk through some things that I was struggling with, and hopefully I them some. And I see Matt Sanders is on here from KMIZ. Just trying to get more information out more quickly. So I think everybody would agree that we've been doing that. So I'm hoping they're happy with that. I don't know. Haven't talked to KMIZ since I've been back about that issue, but I don't know. We're just trying to be better about that. And that came from a class I took. It was 10 weeks long and really focused on how to get that information out. I'm not a social media person, so learning more about that has helped me some. But no, it was a good experience. I'm glad to be home. 10 weeks in a dorm with another man is not something I was prepared for as a 47-year-old guy. But
hi, my name is Ethan Hines. I'm a reporter. I'm also with ABC 17 KMIZ. I'm trying to record this meeting, if that's okay. It keeps telling me to ask the host for permission.
Ethan, the meeting, I record all the meetings as the host, and this meeting will appear on our website within a few hours after it's over.
Okay.
It's actually a YouTube link, but if you just go to our website, I'll link to it. It just takes me a couple hours to get it all uploaded.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much.
And it's really exciting. You can watch all our previous meetings as well.
Okay.
All right, I'm showing 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started now. My name is David Mallory. I'm co-president this year of Muleskinners along with Carl Scala. So I want to welcome everyone. Our speaker today is going to have to go ahead and get started right away so you can leave for a 1 o'clock commitment. So we're going to push our announcements and any business we have to the end of the meeting. So we'll go ahead and get started with the speaker, if that's all right with everyone. Kathy, I believe you're going to introduce him. Are you here, Kathy? I'm looking. Otherwise, maybe we won't start right away. There she is, Kathy. Would the rest of you join me in muting yourselves so we don't interfere with the speaker? And I'm sure hopefully he'll have time at the end for questions, but we'll leave that for him. Kathy Jensen, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, David. Is that better?
Good enough.
I'm sorry if you're having trouble hearing me.
We can hear you now.
Okay,
Thank you.
let me try again. Okay, our speaker today is Columbia Police Chief Geoff Jones. Geoff Jones was appointed Columbia's Chief of Police on August 5th, 2019, and was officially sworn in September 16th. Chief Jones leads a department that is dedicated to providing excellent customer service and reducing violent threats to community safety. Deep local roots, relationships, and understanding are the hallmarks of his life and work in Columbia. Chief Jones is a Columbia native who first joined the Columbia Police Department as a cadet at age 15 while attending Rockbridge High School. Also, as a student, when not involved in school activities or working at his uncle's restaurant, he volunteered his time to CPD. Chief Jones earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from the University of Central Missouri in 1997. He joined the Sedalia Police Department after graduation, but returned in 1998 to answer the calling he found as a cadet to serve his community as a Columbia police officer. Over the past 24 years, Chief Jones has worked as a patrol officer, narcotics detective, sergeant, police lieutenant, and now police chief. During this time, he also earned a master's degree in criminal justice and sociology from Lincoln University, and graduated from the Missouri Police Chief Association's Law Enforcement Command College. In September 2022, Chief Jones graduated from the prestigious FBI National Leadership Academy. He serves on the Missouri Justice Reinvestment Executive Oversight Council, which advises the governor on fostering the sustainability of all just.
I think we lost you, Kathy. You got muted again. Well,
I think I got dropped.
you're
So
back.
I'd like to turn the floor over to Chief Jones.
Well, thanks for having me. I won't be able to stay a very long time, but I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about FUSIS, answer any questions that I can. I have not been formally trained to use the system, but I feel like I have a pretty good working knowledge of some of its all of its functionality. But basically, we're not asking to add cameras anywhere. And I want to divide what I'm talking about into two different things. One is talking about residential cameras, and the other one is talking about business cameras. I'll talk about business cameras first. The way that FUSIS is set up and what makes them unique is they're able to take camera information or camera feeds from any platform. So if you have an open loop system, so in a business, the type of, not a ring camera, that's a closed loop system, but an open loop system, you can, with the use of an appliance that's either going to be donated to us if this passes, or donated by us if this passes to some businesses, or it can be purchased. With this appliance, you can give access at different levels of your choosing. It's completely voluntary to have access to that camera. That could be from registering the camera and saying, hey, we have a camera here. If you have an incident and you want to look at it, get a hold of us. It can be based on an incident. You can see live feed. It can be just looking at recorded information and not live feed cameras, or it can just be live feed cameras. But these are in public places where you don't have an expectation of privacy. And they wouldn't be pointed in any place where people had an expectation of privacy. So we would set parameters consistent with what other places have done, maybe even a little more strict, to make sure that we're not looking into private places. But that has to be done with an appliance. We can't just tap into someone's camera, even if we wanted to. And then what they call the donor site, the person who is donating that video footage to us gets to set the level in which we would have that access. So it could be, like I said, from no direct access, and they wouldn't even use an appliance. They would just register it to having the appliance and giving us all the way up to live feed. So some of the things that I've been asked is, does it have facial recognition? It does not. It can track things like a backpack or a bicycle, or a red car or a blue car. It does not track race or gender. So facial recognition is out. That's something that we get asked a lot. That can be limited by the product or by us. Those things are limited by the product currently. So even if I wasn't the chief and someone else came in and said, we want that, they don't have that capability with FUSIS. So that's one plus in my mind for FUSIS, because it limits that capability. Really, the use of these, we're not asking for anything that we don't already have the ability to obtain. It's just currently it takes a long time in some instances, in a lot of instances, to get recorded footage. So we do a canvas typically. Currently, we look for cameras, then we contact the business, and we ask to look at their video. Most of the times, almost 100% of the time, people give us consent to look at a video. We look for whatever it is we're looking for in that particular instance. Then we have to find a way to download it. Many times the person who's working at that time doesn't know how to use the camera system. So sometimes we don't get to view it. until someone else comes in hours or days later. And then the same is true of trying to download it and get it back here. And then once we get it here, we have difficulty in finding a player online usually to try to play the video in-house. So there are a lot of obstacles that come with us obtaining video, but courts expect it because it can be something that incriminates people, or it can be exculpatory. So it really does work both ways. So we try to get video on most of our cases, but right now it's very difficult and time consuming. We're not asking to get access to anything that we can't already get. It's more about efficiency with us. We've had businesses that have web-based camera systems that can give us logons to look at their cameras. We don't have the resource, nor do we want to get into the business of doing general surveillance. I don't have the people to do that currently. And it just wouldn't be productive. I would liken it to, if you look at your screen on the Zoom call, and if all these video feeds are going, and if this gets passed and we have hundreds of cameras on the system, think of this screen with panes that look just like this with 100 or 1,000 cameras on them. And then think about what you could discern by looking at that screen. And the answer is probably nothing. It's too much information for anybody to just take in. We wouldn't have people to sit here and do this anyway. But just thinking about that logically and the logistics of that, that's not something that we'd be interested in doing. That doesn't mean that if we didn't have, a concert or some kind of event downtown or at the mall, that they wouldn't want us to monitor crowd movement or traffic movement and have cameras out facing the street. That's a possibility with this system. Typically, when we look at traffic movement and outside stuff in those instances, we already use drones for that. We use those in the demonstrations in 2020. That's why we didn't have huge traffic issues and people weren't getting frustrated and having issues. We had some issues early on when we weren't using drones with people driving through protest sites and those types of things. So that was a tool that we used to manage that. There are people that feel like this is too big brotherish, and I understand that viewpoint. I don't share that viewpoint because of the voluntary nature of it and the ability to restrict the accesses and the ability for us to audit the system and just the internal audits that are built into the system, whether we wanted to participate in that or not. We would, obviously, but if it weren't me and someone else was here, that's something I get asked a lot. Those controls are built into the system. So I do understand that people have concerns. I'm not trying to set those concerns aside at all. We've tried to write our broader policy that addresses those concerns, but we'll also have to write a procedure once we have a working knowledge of the system so that we can also address those concerns and make sure that we're using it responsibly. That's something that we would post to the website so that everybody knew what we were doing, when we were doing it, how we were doing it. So that's business side. And then there's the residential side. And the residential side is really more of a registry. We wouldn't allow people to buy the appliance. It's called a core that you would have to plug in to share video. Because we really don't want to be looking at private residents' cameras. So what you can do, however, and we do this, the last 2 homicides that we've had, we've gone to people that had Ring doorbell cameras and similar cameras and said, hey, do you have anything during this time? And we've had useful information. The last homicide that we just solved was on video. So we have that homicide on video. And that's from a residential camera that faces the street. That was in a parked car on the street. So the way that we would get that with Fusus now, as opposed to going through that same process that I described with businesses, is that if you register the person who's on scene can actually drop a pin and draw out a radius around that pin, and it'll pull up the people who are registered in that area. And we ask people to give us a phone number or an email or both, and we can send them a text message or an email saying, hey, during this time, this happened. We're asking you to look for this. And if you're willing to share it with us and you have something, if you could send it to this link, it gives a secure link. So that is tracked through the system back into the digital evidence vault, where it would be held for trial. And it has to meet the same requirements that we meet for our other databases, like the Mules database, where we run license plates and those sort of things. So that's it in a nutshell, but there would be no live access to a residential camera. Most residential cameras are Ring, which are closed loop systems, and that couldn't be done in this system. If someone were to have a type of a security system like a business would have at their home that was web-based, you could technically do that, but we would limit that by our policy and procedure so that we're not looking at residential cameras that way. We wouldn't allow people to buy cores for their homes. So another question about that, I got asked, what about apartment complexes? And I think it would be reasonable to have exterior cameras in parking lots and areas like that, but we would have to be judicious in how we did that. Again, that's something that we would write into a procedure so that we could tell people, yeah, there's cameras in a parking lot. But that's kind of how I see it. Are there any questions? Sarah?
So one of the concerns I'm seeing is over facial recognition. And, I think there was some unfortunate language in something that went out that said that the software can search for specific people, and that was interpreted to mean facial recognition. Can you talk about, is that a possibility at all? Is it a feature that's there that we're choosing not to use, or is it not a feature of this software?
That's a really good question. So there are other products that have facial recognition. Fusus does not currently, but we would also limit our use to not have facial recognition, even if they were to get it down the road. I've been told by the company that it is their stance not to use facial recognition. But I think the language you're talking about is, there are two different conversations there. And one is that I'm trying to limit the number of investigative type stops that are based off of a general description. And I'll give you an example of that. Someone calls us and says, there's an unknown race person wearing a red shirt, driving a blue car that just fired a gun at Providence and Broadway. Cops are going to come to that scene. They're going to flood the scene. And anyone who's wearing a red shirt driving a blue car is going to get pulled over. And it may or may not be the right person. And we're going off someone's description under stress. Everybody knows that witness statements are shaky at best a lot of times. So having a video, even if it's a past recorded video of an event, but having it while you're responding to a call, that picture could be sent out to all of the officers on their computers in their cars. And we would be stopping the person driving the car wearing the shirt instead of just stopping people who match that description. That is my hope for this. Other people see that differently, but that is how I would intend to use that. What was the other part of that? Sarah, you had a different part of that other than
just I think you answered it. It was, could it even be done with the software? The answer was no. And even if it was possible or became possible in the future, you're pledging that that would not be a feature that CPD would utilize.
Right. And we would
I
put
think
that
you
in
answered
the
both.
policy, and the final policy and procedure would have to have that in there, but that is something we would do. We've had enough public meetings, and we've talked about this in council too, that there's some accountability there for me or whoever comes next, that's part of the policy, because that's what people want and expect. But I do understand that the concern's there. So.
We have some hands raised. Pam Springsteel, I see first. Pam, would you unmute yourself and ask your question or make your statement?
Chief Jones, I
Looking for the unmute
When-
button.
wondering if you saw the letter to the editor by the two ministers,
I did.
and so if you could speak to that. I have it here in front of me, and I guess I'm not really sure how it relates to fuses, but they write, technology is not neutral, it is biased as the humans who design and use it. So bias will also be part of the technology's use. We wish to voice our opposition to expanding surveillance policing rather than investing in support for community well-being. And then another part, they say, could this surveillance be used down the road to prosecute those accessing reproductive health care or other necessary resources that could become illegal at the will of our extremist legislature?
Okay, so I'm not sure how to answer that, so I'm gonna do my best.
Okay.
I don't really see how it relates to fusus because we're not expanding our capability with camera systems because we can get this footage anyway. It's just not very efficient. I see it as doing the opposite of being biased because we're looking for a specific person who was involved instead of looking based on a description. And I think that's where, in my opinion, that's where bias sets in, and you have the ability to have those things, either conscious or unconscious bias that would feed into that. But when you have the car and the person with an image, I think it limits that. And I think that having that video later, whether that's for a civil or criminal case, gives both sides a level playing field as to what occurred. So if there was bias that occurred and it was on video, again, that cuts both ways. And I think that could tell a story for others too. And even thinking back of George Floyd, I don't know that Derek Chauvin would have been held accountable but for video that was there. And I don't know, Fusus is a program that they use there. I don't know if those cameras were on Fusus or not, but just talking about the accountability of having those cameras, it's going to capture the police in those public spaces too. So just my thought.
Thank you, Pam. Does that answer your question then?
I think so. Reverend Molly is my minister, and I think she's out of town and with her family. I think I'll just ask her to come and see this recording, and maybe that will help her.
I didn't hear who that statement was from, but you're reading. I missed that first part, but okay, very good. I'll go ahead. Let's go to, I'll move on to the next question then. Kathy Jensen, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Find my digital cameras. When you so that you and nothing happening in your neighborhood, be a number of cameras.
Kathy, you're breaking up. How about if you type your question into chat and then we'll ask Chief Jones to address it that way? Would that work?
I'll do that.
All right, then we'll move on to the next question while I do that. Thank you. Carl Scala is next. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, Chief, this is there's a history of surveillance in Colombia. It's been going on for 10 or 12 years or so. Many years ago, it was about a downtown sidewalk and street surveillance, and it was following a beating in one of the parking garages. And that kind of failed, but the sentiment at that time was to encourage the city to support the local businesses with some of their camera needs when it came to surveillance. So the culture has kind of shifted over time, and people have gotten a little bit more accustomed to cameras. But it seems to me that the argument here has a lot to do with efficiency, not to do with new surveillance or discrimination, that kind of thing. But I can understand how people are very sensitive to it. Do you see it that way too? It's just a tool to use for the efficiencies of some of the exigencies that we have these days.
I do, and I have not talked about school shootings, but I also,
I think I saw.
I'll tell you how we're trained to deal with school shootings, and I'll tell you my perspective on this. And the schools do support this. Right now, if there were to be a school shooting or shooting at the mall for that matter, but an active assailant with a gun, we are trained to go toward the sound of gunfire. That's how we're going to locate the person in the building currently. And as someone that has a kid in public school, that we need to understand that every round that goes off is somebody's kid, potentially. And if I have the ability to pull up a camera and see someone in a hallway based on the event, you know, if the school gives us access during an event, which is one of the permissions, if I can see where they're at when they're not shooting someone, then it gives us the ability to go in there and stop that threat without them shooting more people. And so aside from just efficiency of getting the video, it's the efficiency in the response. But also we get dispatched to calls based on someone's interpretation of what they see, and then the dispatcher's interpretation of what they're being told, and then the officer's interpretation of both of those things. And when we respond with that, we always come with more than, we come with what we believe in the worst case scenario we would need. And when based on the information we have. And if we have the ability, you know, if someone says that someone's breaking into a business, or if there's some fight with, you know, we get calls with fights with 30 people. If we can pull up a camera and see that it's 2, that may be a 3 officer call. If it's a 30-person fight with just people watching, that may be a 10 officer call. So there's some efficiency in response when there's an event, being able to see the supervisor pulling up and being able to see what they can allocate to a particular event if we're fortunate enough to have a camera feed. So there's efficiency in different ways, not just in gathering the evidence and being able to download it and view it, but also how we respond to a call. So I see some benefits in a couple areas there.
Thank you. Did that, Carl, does that address your?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Next, we have Eric Galicia from the Missourian. Eric, go ahead.
Hello, Chief Jones. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? So this is going to go up to City Council on Monday. You're going to lay out, you know, some of your policy, right? And if it is approved, will it then go to, will you be developing the procedure after that? And just to add on, right, like in the previous story that we wrote, you said that procedure, the writing of the procedure would be very transparent. So how do you plan to be transparent with the writing of the procedure?
So those are good questions. So right now I have a general knowledge of the system, right? I wouldn't know how to click through and use every function of the system, but I would know generally what it does. To have a procedure, I would need to know what the system limits and what we would limit by procedure and policy. So we would have to have a working knowledge of the system to be able to write a good procedure. So that's part of it. And until we're trained to do that, if we were to go with the product, it would be, we wouldn't implement the system until we had a procedure laid out. Policies and procedures are different things. Currently, we have a policy manual, and the way that our policies are written and this is kind of off topic, but it goes to what you're saying. So I want people to understand the difference in the two. We are trying to get accredited through CALEA. And the company that we're trying to get accredited through is what a lot of people in the United States law enforcement agencies try to get accredited through. And they say that policies should be a broader guideline, and then procedures need to be defined more clearly and more precisely. And those definitions can be provided. We put those up in a meeting, the last meeting we had, but similar to what we do when we produce a policy now with our procedure, once we understand the system and what the limitations are, and taking the concerns that we've heard from, well, seeing things in the news and having our public meetings and those types of things, being able to drill down those procedures so that people have a level of comfortability, if that's a word, with a system, so that we're not going to disregard anybody's concerns, but we want people to understand where those restrictions lie, whether that's with the product itself, because there are a lot of limitations with the product and how people can give permissions and the functionality of the system. And then there would be further restrictions based on who we allowed to see what and when it's audited, how it's audited, because there are internal audits in the system, but we would also have a function where supervisors would on shift view who's on the system. We would prohibit people from getting online from somewhere else, but the system, a benefit to us is the system actually logs what IP address it's coming from. So we can tell if people are at work on the system, and if they're not at work, what that looks like as far as discipline, so that we can set those parameters as a procedure. The policy, the council doesn't approve policy or procedure, but I think Andrea is on here. I think what the council wants to see is that we're going to address these concerns in our policy. But after we're trained, we're going to have to drill that down even further and be more specific with the procedure, so that we're meeting our accreditation guidelines and we're meeting the expectations and the concerns of the people in the city, because we don't want people to feel like they're under general surveillance all the time. And that just logistically, that can't happen right now. And if we're looking 20 years from now where we might have enough resources, maybe we have to have a policy and a procedure that prohibits that, and we can do that. So, and an audit function, so that we're auditing ourselves in addition to the system, so that we are being accountable to that. So hope that answered your question.
Well, I just I was also asking if, as the procedure is being written out, are you going to be holding more community meetings and showing the people this is where we're at, and getting feedback during that time as well, like you did with the policy? We
can. We will definitely post it, but I don't think it's a bad idea to go through the procedure in a public meeting. It's very similar to a policy meeting, but I think that we'll have to have a draft of it so that we can explain the functionality of the system and why a procedure is a procedure. Because I couldn't even begin to try to explain that now, because I don't know the functionality of the system. So that'd be something I'd be open to. That's not something that we've done before. So, and since we're transitioning, one thing I didn't say that is relevant here is, since we're transitioning from having the policies written the way that they currently are to going into a policy and a procedure, it would fit the model. We just haven't done it yet. So that's why I'm actually thinking through this as we're talking, but yeah, I'd be fine to have a public meeting about the procedure. But good question.
Thank you, Eric. Kathy Jensen had her message typed in, so I'll just read that. People don't have chat open. Just want to clarify, people's home cameras can be registered so that CPD will know that there are X number of cameras in the general area where a crime has occurred. and people may be contacted by CPD asking for the video, but residential, as people's home cameras, will not be tied into Fusus. Is that correct?
Not in the sense that we can view the camera, because you won't even have the appliance that is required to do that. But you could be on a registry that told us, hey, we have a camera, and if you want video footage, contact us and we'll look for it and may or may not provide it.
So people currently who have a camera, if they don't register, you won't know that they've got a camera? Is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, you choose to register it or not. So if you don't register it, we'll go through the same process. We're still going to have to go through a process of a foot canvas until this either takes off or it doesn't, and we still have to do foot canvases. But it even if we still have to do canvases, it saves us hours, days, sometimes weeks getting the video when we know there's a camera. I will tell you that one of our unsolved homicides, I won't say which one, but there was one that we found a camera after the point. We found out that there was a camera, just the way it was positioned. You couldn't see it from the street during the canvas, but we ended up finding it days later. And had we had that camera, this may not be an open homicide anymore. So there's things like that we consider. But the short answer is we're not going to access people's footage on private systems. They would have to share a downloaded copy of a video either through the link, or if they couldn't figure that out or there was some problem with that, we would have to send someone to them, put it on a flash drive or something. But we wouldn't have access to people's home cameras.
Thank you. Next question we have from Lacey Reeves with KOMU Channel 8. Lacey, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Chief Jones. I'm Lacey. Nice to see you today. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was if it were to pass on Monday, what prominent businesses have already said that they want to be involved and have this used for their cameras? And then as well as, has MU said that any opinion either way on if they would be interested in using them?
So MU is interested and they support it. And I think they've sent out a letter or something. I won't know all of the businesses. I've had several reach out, when they see me in meetings and stuff. But some of the major places like the downtown CID, the mall, or I don't know the name of it. There's a automotive shop on the east side of town. There have been several places that have showed interest in it. But I don't know what level of access, whether it's a recorded one or a live one. And frankly, that's less of a concern to me than being able to access this and not spending hours and days with multiple detectives trying to get video. That's really hampering our ability to be efficient in investigations.
Yes, you did. The other thing I wanted to ask is, I know you talked about what the business cameras that the Fusus core would be used. That's the actual appliance. So does that just plug itself in? Do you plug the camera into that small box?
You cut out on my end for just a second there.
Oh,
so
sorry.
You're asking how the core would work?
Yes, it's I was on Fusus's website and it has all these different things they offer. And I know you said the core model specifically. So that's a box, right? About yay big. Do you plug that into each specific camera, or?
It plugs into the system somehow. I am not a tech person. I'm lucky to be able to use my iPhone. But they actually will set up a call center line just for us so that people who want the system, they purchase it from them, or we're going to have some that if it's a business that can't afford it and it's, they want the cameras, we're going to try to give some of ours out to people.
You guys are going to get a specific number of those to start with if it were to pass.
Right. And I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but it's significant.
Or costs if a business wanted to just purchase one? I know you said you have them for donation, but if they're well off and can.
Right. Yeah, if there's businesses that can afford it, we would expect them to absorb that. But my understanding is that it's kind of a plug and play kind of thing. But one of the things I haven't mentioned is that if it's a business, let's say that has 16 cameras, they can limit access camera by camera. So if they have stuff inside that they don't want to show, like the lounge or something like that, they wouldn't put that on the system. They could have that access camera by camera.
Yeah.
So those cores vary in price depending on the number of cameras. I think the smaller one's like 4 cameras, but for a lot of businesses, that smaller one would be appropriate for those external cameras.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Lacey. Herb Tillema, you're up next. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Herb Tillema here. Thank you for appearing, Chief. We appreciate it very much. I want to ask a slightly broader question beyond the hot button issue of the moment, but I think it related it because of your emphasis upon importance of professional practice in evaluating what should be and should not be regarding the surveillance. I want to thank you as a former commissioner when you were a young whippersnapper, a real young whippersnapper. And we tried to raise the standards and the minimum standards in the state, being well aware that the standards across Missouri are woefully varied. We tried to raise them. We got a little bit of progress, and we had great allies, including the Columbia Police Department, Sheriff's Department of Boone County, St. Louis City and County. And but I'm out of date. So would you tell me what is the current level in terms of hours required for new hires training before certification for the state, the minimum, for the Columbia Police Department, especially in comparison with St. Louis City and Boone County Sheriffs?
Right. So I don't remember the number of hours, Herb. It's either 470 or 600, I think. But that's a minimum standard for the state. So they have curriculum through post, and I couldn't even begin to go through the list. Just so since you're asking about training, I think you know more than most, so I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. There are different areas in which post requires police officers to have training, and those academies meet those minimum requirements. So when people come out, they have the minimum training to come out onto the street. So after that 3 months in the academy, they actually come out of the academy and they go through a couple of weeks of orientation with us. So they're learning about the city processes, things like that. And then they go through about 3 months of field training with 3 different field training officers to talk about our policies and our mission and values. So they have that additional 3 months of training in field training, which I think is the most beneficial outside of the classroom. But that's where they're learning how to police here. So it's not that general training that you would get in the academy, because we don't have our own academy here like St. Louis and some other places. The benefit to having your own academy is you get to teach the curriculum the way that you as an agency police, because they all do it slightly different depending on their community. But field training is the place that we get to train that. I think I have time for just another question, and then I'm going to have to go.
Ethan Hines, I think from KMIZ. Ethan, would you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Chief, I hope you're having a good day today. I have just a couple really quick questions. One, do you consider, or will the system consider an apartment building a business or a residential area?
Yeah, and I touched on that. I don't know if you were on here, but those internal spaces, like internal hallways and things like that, we would not want to put on our system. We would treat that, again, this has to be done as part of the procedure, but we would treat that as our review of the cameras as a private space. But things like a parking lot, we would consider that as a business type camera. If it's a big general parking area or something like that. Those get a little trickier, but I think what I want people to know is I'm committed to keeping cameras out of people's private spaces. I don't want that at my home, and I don't want that for anybody else's home. So it's really about those publicly viewable spaces, like a public parking lot that the delivery driver could come to, as opposed to a hallway where only 3 people go into their doors, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And then it's my understanding, that as a resident, you could register with saying that you do have a camera. If a resident is registered and they're refusing to provide video or information, is there the potential for like the police department to serve a warrant for that information if they're registered, or is it just kind of like okay, you don't want to do it, that's fine?
Yes, you could serve a warrant. We can do that now. I will tell you that I can't think of a time where that's happened, where we've had to serve a warrant to get the video, outside of it being like the suspect's house. If something happened at the suspect's house on the street in front of their house and there was video footage, we get a court order for that. I don't know that we would know to even have probable cause to get a warrant unless someone was supplying us the information that they had the video, though. So there's some, in theory, yes, you could write a search warrant and get a video from someone that had it if they didn't want to give it to you. I have never seen that happen unless it was a suspect's house. Yeah, I think that's the best way I can answer that question. Most open.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate that. We've got a couple questions in chat, but if you have to go, if you have time, you can take a look at those. But we don't want to hold you up, make you late for your other meeting.
Let me look real quick.
One question from a follow-up question from Sarah Catlin, saying she'd seen claims that Fusus could take over cameras without permission using the internet or Wi-Fi. And it's her understanding that only a camera connected to one of your boxes would be accessed live by CPD. She just wondered, could you verify that?
That's accurate. If you don't have the appliance and you haven't given us permission, we cannot access the video. And the access to the video would be only at the level that you gave us access. I'm trying to look through the chat here. Sorry if I'm.
So I just scrolled to the end. And the other question from Scott Crystal: how long would these be stored, and where would they be stored? I think that he means videos that you have acquired.
Right. So the way that this system works is until we have downloaded them and brought them into evidence, they are not ours. They're yours. But once they come into evidence, we would follow the rules of retention through Sunshine and through the court process, the same as we would with our videos now. One thing I really like about this system, I'm really not trying to be a salesperson, but one thing I like about this system is that it is integrated with Axon, which is who we use to store our body. That's our body-worn camera provider, but they also have a CJIS, criminal justice information system. They have a requirement through CJIS so that they're meeting the standards of CJIS and keeping those videos so that we can put those into the vault. So it's a direct transfer digitally into that vault, and it's kept as evidence under those federal standards. So it would depend on the case, how long we keep it. Like a murder, I think, is 100 years. But a misdemeanor, it's after the court has disposed all of its process. So it would depend on the video, but once we have it, we'd follow the rules just like we do now when we acquire other video.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions. I appreciate it so much for you being here with Chief Jones. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you back sometime on some other topic. But it's great having you here with us today. Thank you so much.
I tell you what, I have on my.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and let him slip away, or you stick around.
I just want to thank everybody. I know this is scheduled till 1. I have to do some preparation for my next meeting. Please reach out to me directly if you have questions or need anything, my email is jeffrey.jones@como.gov. I don't know. I want to make sure people understand what the system does and doesn't do. So I will try to respond the best I can. As you all have seen, things have been crazy busy. And I wish I could stay longer. It's just been incredibly busy. So again, thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Good questions. And I hope that I've given you a good kind of idea of what the system does and doesn't do. So I appreciate
Thank you, Chief Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All
This was
right.
really helpful.
All right.
Thank
All right, we'll move on to the announcements that we skipped earlier, so you'd have a little more time before we had to leave. Pam, are you prepared to share the announcements for the week?
I am. And I want to say I saw that in the chat. I'm really glad the press was here today. We're really glad they came. I want to start out by showing people that this is the card that was sent out to voters in Boone County, but none of us got it. I think it was people that rarely vote. And we did this with the Boone County Democrats and with Kip Kendrick, and we paid $2,000 for our part of it. So I think it was very well done. And let me see if I can scroll it down. Yeah, and this is the backside of it, which is about Kip. So I think it was well worth it, but since we paid that much for it, I thought it was really, the Muleskinners needed to see it. Yeah, let's see if I can. Let's see. I think somebody's trying to say something.
It was Kathy, but it shows her bandwidth is low. Kathy,
Right.
even if it's quick, Kathy might